We are moving on with our book, Callings, Finding and Following an Authentic Life by Greg Levoy. And so far we've talked about how spontaneous calls, which are really whispers from our soul or from our higher power or whatever you care to call it. Yes.
So did you say Greg Levoy?
Greg Levoy, yes. And they come in the form of either encounters with people or dreams, synchronicities. And these are ways that calls all come to you, but you can also invoke calls through pilgrimages. It's one way that we've talked about quite extensively. And at the moment we're talking about invoking calls through memory's vital secrets. In other words, looking to the past to find some of the answers to what's going on in your life right now. So we talked last week. No, we didn't. Last week we did the energy forecast.
Yeah, we did.
That was a test.
We did talk.
Yes, we did. We did talk. We always talk. Anyway, so the week before we talked about how we're going to need all the help that we can get in following our calls.
Sorry about that.
Greg Levoy.
I hear a calling. He says we're going to need every resource at our disposal, including some of those that we've previously disposed of. We're going to need our self-interest to admit that something is missing in our lives, and maybe our despair to motivate us to find out what it is. We're going to need our blind faith to trust that what we hear is a call and not just a cell phone in the background. We're going to need our stubbornness and righteous anger to stand up to the resistance from within and without. We're going to need the hermit in us to separate from the culture of conformity. We're going to need our insanity to do what might seem insane. We're going to need our spontaneity and impulsiveness, or we'll never make the jumps. And we're going to need our power to push us through and our joy to celebrate at the feasts. Ignoring these needs isn't the ticket. If we don't go to them, if we don't occasionally arrange the lighting so that our shadows are cast forward where we can see them, in all likelihood they'll come at us from behind. They'll lodge themselves between our intentions and our achievements, thumbing their noses at our attempts to get them off the playing field. They'll become the downstairs neighbours who bang on the ceiling with a broomstick while we are busy having a party. It doesn't It does not do you good to leave a dragon out of your calculations if you live near him, J.R.R. Tolkien once said. Jung considered it a foregone conclusion that whatever we are unwilling to face in ourselves will be forced to confront in the outer world, but our past doesn't obediently stay in the past, and that our lives will conspire in 100 ways to call us towards those very things. What we most want to run from, we'll end up running towards and drawing to us the way sharks are attracted to thrashing bodies.
Wow.
Did you relate? I just thought that was quite the analogy there.
Absolutely. The material I was determined to elude has claimed me, the writer Pat Hampel once described, while the subjects I wish to enlist in my liberation, fat novels about love and betrayal, have spurned me. For example, when she started college at the University of Minneapolis, she lost no time in dumping the Catholic world her parents had so carefully constructed for her. This is why she chose to go there. I understood that many people had succeeded in losing their religion at the university. For decades, she considered it a shining achievement that she had eluded the nuns. The result? She spent the better part of 5 years writing a memoir about growing up Catholic. The protagonist was a contemplative nun. Hampel also felt vaguely ashamed that her Czech grandmother couldn't write English, that she was who she was at all. An immigrant is a quaint antecedent at a distance. Mine was too close for comfort. The shame was real, disloyal, mean. The result? She came and got me and became the heroine of my first memoir. There's no walking away from our shadow or the radioactive elements of our past, any more than we can walk away from an angry partner and expect him or her not to still be angry when we come back, any more than we can shove unpaid bills in a drawer and expect the electricity to stay on, any more than we can pour poison into the ground and not expect it to come up through fruits and vegetables. There's no away. There's no out, as in throwing the garbage or your keys out. No trash icon. No abort function. Like the earth, our psyches are closed systems. You can't, for instance, convince yourself one clear-headed and optimistic day that you no longer feel any fear and that you'll sit down and do something important without expecting that your shadow, unable to stomach the hypocrisy and, in fact, feeling genuine fear, will turn on the television and order out for pizza, or discover some ancient and unfinished project that suddenly seems in immediate need of resurrection, or insist that you couldn't possibly get a lick of work done with your office looking the way that it does. We end up going to our shadows one way or another. Either we take them on willingly and attempt to work them into something useful or at least manageable, or we splatter them onto others, projecting, as psychologists call it. For instance, if we're frustrated with ourselves for not following a call, we often become frustrated with others who aren't following theirs, or envious of those who are. The most expedient way to recognize shadow is to look at what we project, because what we can't admit or abide in ourselves we'll find, even seek out in others. It's what we despise in people, or envy, or worship, or become obsessed with. Whatever manners we associate with devils and saints. Isn't this amazing stuff? Anyway, Ursula Le Guin's book, A Wizard of Earthsea, addresses projection beautifully. In it, a young wizard named Ged accidentally releases a demon into the world in practicing some sorcery. The book revolves around his attempts to reconcile this situation. At the end, he confronts the demon and realizes that the only way to gain control over it is to say its name, which is his own. Not Voldemort.
Not Rumpelstiltskin.
Not Rumpelstiltskin. Ged. Name the pain, theologian Matthew Fox says. By naming our demons, we diminish their power over us. We reform them from demons back to daemons. Daemons were the origin of demons. They were divine spirits, demigods, intermediaries who passed notes back and forth between gods and humans. The Latin translation of daemon is soul. As such, they can be either creative or destructive, depending entirely on whether we receive them or reject them. By negating them, we turn them into angry spooks, consigning them to what the poet John Milton called pandemonium, the capital of hell. And an apt description of what happens in the human psyche when our guides are driven underground, when a force as powerful as the shadow is scorned. Some traditions still carry on the notion that noontime is actually dangerous, because at this time the shadow, being identified with the soul and the soul with life, grows smaller, meaning that life itself is threatened. Conversely, says James Hillman, the ancient root of the word happiness is eudaimonia, or a well-pleased daemon. Since shadow is largely what was unloved in us, and in some cases with good reason, reintegrating these parts will mean attempting to love them as if they're strangers who might be gods. But it's still crucial to keep our wits about us. Loving our own cruelty or rage or vengefulness or narcissism is different from identifying with it or giving it license. Treating the devil with respect is not the same as worshipping the devil. Dealing with the shadow demands the ability to deal with paradox. Shadow must be loved and changed. It is intolerable and it is in us. The enemy is also an ally, or as the novelist Isabel Allende says, a scary cellar acts as a stimulus to the imagination, which is why she hides in her own basement sinister surprises for her grandchildren. A plaster skeleton, a treasure map, or trunks filled with pirate disguises. I thought of a few other things I could probably use. I controlled myself. Myth is full of the dualistic nature of the demonic. Pluto, the Roman name for Hades, the god of the underworld, is also the god of wealth. I did not know that. Mars, the god of war, was originally the god of agriculture and the life force. Pele is not just a famous soccer star. He's the Hawaiian goddess. She is the Hawaiian goddess of volcanoes. Represents a destructive force, but also one that actually creates new earth. The wicked fairy in Sleeping Beauty was a wise woman, angry at not being invited to a royal bash given in honour of the newborn princess. Lucifer means light. The Minotaur, the bow-headed beast who lived at the center of the labyrinth, was named Asterion, which means star. And 90% of the shadow, said Jung, who coined the term, is pure gold. I find this all really, really interesting because once again we are encouraged to actually get rid of or ignore the shadow. But the shadow isn't always bad. That's the problem. We tend to think of it as bad. Come on.
Without the shadows, you couldn't see the beauty of the moon
Thank
as
you.
it rises.
Exactly.
Great song, Me and My Shadow.
Yes.
Strolling down the other.
Because that's the thing. The shadow is necessary. As, once again, the contrast to light. Yes, Ruth Ann.
Well, on a more personal level, you know, I ended up responsible for my whole family for a long time, raising the kids, making sure that they didn't go the other route that was presented to them. And this wasn't something I felt cut out for, but it's something I grew into and I think ultimately did pretty well. What happened was that I got stuck in that role when they didn't really need it anymore.
Yes.
And the bottom line is that I proceeded to play this role of Mom, Mother Knows Best.
Uh-huh.
And it really started biting me, you know. I started having these problems and I couldn't figure it out. And finally, I needed help. And I didn't know how to ask them for help.
Right.
And then it hit me. The shadow's name was Pride.
Ooh.
And that I really had to work heavy with that and get rid of that. It just, so the shadow has a golden side. You just have to recognize it first.
Right,
And
right.
then start looking at it, you know. I got
But
stuck
I
in
think you
pride.
also raise another very interesting point is that the shadow has many different names and guises.
True.
This is the thing, you know.
Well, and in fact, I was doing my responsible duty initially. It was God-centered, but then it changed. The need changed, and I didn't.
Right.
So, you know, shadows can be created
Oh,
in the
yeah.
middle of everything.
Yes. We can't get away from them. That's the point. The shadow is there.
The shadow knows.
Yeah, I knew that was
Only
coming
the
up.
shadow.
The shadow.
Thank you. Yes,
I
Laura.
don't have a conclusive thought on this, but it occurs to me that that's an aspect of duality that we are all living in. The two poles, the light,
Uh-huh.
the dark, and finding the balance in the middle,
Absolutely.
and actually the perspective above it, so that you see that.
Right. Yes. I think that's a very good point. That it is part of the duality. And it is another of these constructs where we actually need the contrast in order to be able to bring everything into focus. That is the thing.
That's the lesson we have. That's what this is a crisis-bearing planet. And which is a weird way to look at it, but there isn't a place that doesn't have something going on.
Well, no, and I think that is the point, is, you know, we've talked about this before, that if you view this as a school, if you view this as somewhere that you've signed up to come in, these things are lessons. And if there is no dark, then, you know, if everything is all light, then there are no lessons. Yes.
It's also just another way of saying that old saying of your greatest asset is also your greatest weakness.
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
It sure can be.
And so, you know, you have to have them both.
Yes.
You have to for balance.
Absolutely. Yes, Jason.
So yeah, me and Jeff were talking earlier,
Uh-huh.
and we were talking about what brought us here, or you know, why
Right.
did we come here? And on my personal experience, it was, you know, addictions and anger and different
Uh-huh.
stuff that eventually all accumulated and got me to turn and face the other way. So it's just, it almost is like a motivation or a drive to get on the right path when you tend to get lost.
Absolutely.
You're here, Jason.
Yes, I think that's I think
Someone's got to
that
be there to kind of wedge itself. Yeah.
exactly, and it is that contrast that motivates us. Without that contrast, I think we're oblivious to what is actually going on. So,
And along with that,
yes,
sometimes the deeper the pain, the more beautiful and enduring the dedication will be.
absolutely.
And without that, you can lose your own way, but also you lose perspective to see the whole thing in others play out.
Right.
You know, so the empathy.
Yes, but I think the point that was made here is well worth noting that many times we're oblivious to the shadow in ourselves. So we're very, very quick to point out that and what we're actually seeing is a reflection. I said before that everybody you meet is either a mirror or a teacher. Many people are both, just a mirror and a teacher. Most people are. But we do project, yes.
Well, the good thing about the contrast is there's an equal polar opposite side to it. So as far down as you go, if you make it through it,
Yes.
you slingshot to the
Yes.
other end of it, which
Right.
is pretty amazing, because if you think about it, the further down you go, that just means an opportunity for a greater sense
Absolutely.
of joy when
Yes,
you
indeed.
pop through the other side.
And I think Jeff makes a really wonderful point there, about the projectile. If you think about it, in order to fire an arrow, the further back you draw the string, then the more power that you give to the projectile. And that's exactly what Jeff is saying, that many times that the further down you go, the more you're actually pressing that springboard. And so when you do finally move the other way, you move a lot further and a lot faster. Yes, Ruth Ann.
To put it in terms of a country song.
Oh,
When you hit rock bottom, there's two ways to go: straight up or sideways.
that's a very, very.
Is that a Willie Nelson song?
No, it's Winona Judd. Yes.
Okay.
Moving right along.
Moving swiftly on. Yes, Bonnie.
Sometimes in our lives, it's almost like we feel more comfortable in that shadow, in that drawn place. And we can see the light from the shadow, but we turn our back on it because that comfort level is so ingrained in us, and
Absolutely.
we fool ourselves saying that the shadow place is where we need to be when it's not.
Right. I think many times that can come through through guilt, the old emotions that keep us stuck in places in the darkness. Guilt being one of them, shame being another. Shame needs shadow to survive. It needs shadow and it needs silence to survive. Hang on, Mary.
Well, I'm gonna talk about it in terms of painting.
Oh, there's a surprise.
Of course, that's a surprise. Yeah. The nature of a shadow is that it's shadow, which is shadowy, which means it's transparent. Which means in order for it to be shadowy, it has to have light within it. In order to paint it, you have to have one of the warm colors in it in order to make it look shadowy. Otherwise, it's just a flat blackness. So within that shadow lives light and allows you, it's not the light, but it is light. And so within it, there are places for us to hide if we want, or to be illuminated, And
Yes.
so
Ooh. That's lovely.
Yeah.
And then it ultimately is our decision to come out of it.
Yes.
Exactly.
Darkness
Yes,
isn't
I like
the opposite
that.
of light, but the absence of it.
Exactly.
Right.
That's right.
The key
It
is to
depends
know
on
it's a
what-
choice.
There again is awareness.
Right. Jason, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was talking about being stuck in the shadow for
Uh-huh.
a long period of time or lifetime or, with
Yeah.
just however. I thought of the culture and family and the way we're brought up, those shadows are passed down.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Anytime I noticed in myself just thinking about this now, I've tried to escape that shadow, they grab me and pull me back in, like, oh, that's foo-foo stuff, or
Yes.
why are you doing that woo-woo stuff? Where are you, what?
Welcome home!
Hey, welcome home. That's it.
Yes. When you make the decision to
Yes.
pull away from that and face the light, it's tough. It's very, very
Of course
hard.
it is.
Because
It
those are
is.
people you
Yes.
love and people you want
It's part of the program.
to be.
It's part of the matrix.
That's it.
Guilt,
Take the red
shame,
pill
and
and keep it
everything.
Right.
Yes.
They want you to be
Get a
with
break.
them. They want you to.
Break the program.
Exactly, to break the paradigm that you have been socialized into. Akhilesh.
So I'm just still a little confused as to what we mean by the shadow. Is it a set of emotions? Is it depression? Is it not wanting to face society? I'm not sure what we mean by the shadow and getting out of it. So
I would say that it is emotion and it is feeling. It is it's another propelling force, except it's on the other side of the light. So they are both an impetus to move you forward. They are both
and actually, by
feelings.
that token, what do we mean by the light? I mean, I'm
I
not sure.
think
what
it's
that is.
not on the other side of the light. I think it's in the middle between the light and the darkness.
Okay.
I think it's a resting place for you to get your shit together if you want to, or not.
Right.
So, but it's that fulcrum place where you
Right.
rest before you decide, I'm gonna fall back or I'm gonna go forward.
Yes. Kathy.
Two things. The shadow basically is whatever we perceive as negative, holding us back, dysfunctional, or tripping us up in our lives that keeps us from becoming more enlightened souls, whatever. But I also wanted to give an analogy to the family, a real quick story about the ham.
A ham?
A friend of mine coined this analogy to explain ancestral healing work and how we pass down crap from generation to generation. 3 generations ago, great-great-grandma put a ham in the oven. And before she put the ham in the oven in this pan she had, she cut the ends off. She put the ham in the pan and put it in the oven. Well, her mother, whenever she cooked a ham, would cut the ends off before she put it in the pan. 2 more generations down, granddaughter's got this ham, and her mom's sitting there going, aren't you going to cut the ends off? And she goes, why? Why do we do that? She goes, I don't really know why we do that. So they went back a generation or 2 and asked Grandma, why do you cut the ends off? I didn't have a big enough pan. There was no good reason.
Yeah.
But it got passed down from
Right.
generation to generation, that before you cook the ham, you cut the ends off. But the only reason great-great-grandma did that was because she didn't have a big enough pan.
Right. Absolutely. But I think it's we have to be very careful about saying that the shadow is negative and is
Well, you know what I mean.
yeah.
It's what we would perceive as all I can think of is me and my shadow walking down the avenue. It is a part of helping you. It is like Mary was talking about it. There's light in it. So me and my shadow are going. We're gonna learn from it. We're gonna do the best we can from that. It's just part of some of the things that happen that help
Right.
you on your way for joy or helping others or whatever.
Yes, I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me. But what can be the use of it is more than I can see. Robert Louis Stevenson. I wish I could say it was me, but
And
Yes.
it's our connection
Bonnie.
to the earth. That's where it starts. If you think about it, it's
The sunshine, or you, the shadow.
whenever you're connected to your shadow, you stir your feet into the earth. So it's that connection brings
Right.
us together. And it,
Well, I think also though, again, think about it in terms of, you know, we say, Akhilesh said, what is the light? Well, light isn't simply the manifestation of the sun or the absence of darkness. The light is also knowledge.
I'd say experience.
I was gonna say
Oh.
wisdom.
It's,
All
well,
of it.
wisdom, knowledge, it's all of that. That is the point. It's wisdom, it's knowledge, it's experience, it's all of the above.
The
Yes,
thing that
Jason.
helps me with light is heavy. I think of light as lightweight.
Uh-huh.
It's
Okay.
kind of like I feel heavy. I know I need to get light.
Okay.
that's
So,
good.
yeah,
There
that
we
helps me
go.
with the light,
Okay.
yeah.
Akhilesh, come on.
I mean, the way I think of us is we are like droplets of consciousness that have beliefs.
Uh-huh.
We do some actions. We have
Yes.
thoughts. We have emotions.
Yes.
And our emotions obviously are on a continuum.
Right.
So I think all of these constructs we make up, like shadows and light, and are just, I mean, in a sense, a little bit artificial because ultimately we just are. And
Well, yes.
we have beliefs, and we can have a belief that we have a shadow, we have an alter ego, we have some
Uh-huh.
purpose in life. We can do some actions, and ultimately, if it makes us feel good, then that's emotion. And again, the whole thing of it making us feel good, I mean, ultimately,
Well, I don't know
That
if
whole
it's just
cause-effect
feeling
thing
good
is-
because emotion can also make you feel bad.
well, absolutely. So I guess what I'm saying is our continuum of emotions. Ultimately, we choose to feel emotions, and our beliefs make us feel emotions, right? And our thoughts and actions. So, I mean, I guess we can make up a construct like a shadow and say I'm feeling bad because of the shadow, and then I go, I feel better
Right.
because I found my calling in life. But I'm not sure if these are just more beliefs that we are creating in the
Okay.
web of illusion that we live in. And
Okay.
if you want to detach from it and see who we really are, maybe we need to break away from this quest for knowledge
Uh-huh.
and go into something deeper.
I
Pamela.
have another perspective.
Uh-huh.
This is the theosophical. We talked about demons and daemons,
Uh-huh.
and in the theosophical, the word for shadow is dweller on the threshold.
There it is.
And so
Yes.
these things dwell in us, and
Yes.
we have this threshold to advance spiritually.
Right.
So we don't use the words lighter, but these things that dwell in us hold us back from
Yes.
crossing the threshold.
Right.
I like that term.
Yeah, that is it. Yes, Akhilesh.
Monica, I'm
Yeah. Sorry.
Shane is trying to say something.
Oh, I didn't
Like
see.
sometime.
Thank you. Please.
Well, being a Libra and studying the I Ching, I always go back to balance. The
Yes.
light and the dark are in balance.
Yes.
If you're in the light and you stay in the light too long, you're going to float away. You need the dark. You need the heavy to ground you. We need the light and the dark in
Yes.
equal. And it's always moving. We're always trying
Uh-huh.
to find that. So
And I
just
love the symbol of the
the I
yin
Ching,
and
the
the
Taoist.
yin and the
Yin and
yang.
yang, same
And
thing.
they have a dot. The yin has a dot of the yang in it, and or yang, or however you prefer to say it, and the yang has a dot of the yin in it.
But it's
Balance.
not stationary. It's
No.
always swirling, trying to get that
Yes.
constant balance. So we shouldn't expect ourselves to be there
Right.
all the time.
Exactly.
Which
Thank you,
leads to
Hilda.
forgiveness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, Akhilesh.
Oh, okay. So when I heard threshold, what I was thinking was, I think we're all trying to say the same thing, which is we want to go beyond the surface knowledge of things and look deeper inside. So that might be the threshold. And also looking at, so if you look at ancient, when I say ancient, I mean like a few thousand years old philosophies, they view us very pragmatically as coming from the elements. So we come from earth, we have an earth balance, we have a water balance, we have air, we have fire, and so on. So different elements. So in a sense, our manifestation here is based on matter and so on, and that's who we really are. I mean, it's not all these other structures that we create in our mind are maybe somewhat taking us away from who we really are. So maybe having this balance, this light, dark, is just ways of talking about the different things that make us up, right? I mean,
Right.
like we are stardust, right, in a sense. So we.
Well, yes, but
Isn't it all a path to rediscovering over and over again who we really are, though?
possibly.
And these are the tools to do it with.
Right.
Mary.
Well, of course, I'm gonna talk about pay, but it's also the I Ching. So with the little symbol with the dot of light and the dark and vice versa. In painting too, the light has to have a bit of a dot of some of the opposite color. And the same thing with the dark, because without it, there is no harmony of color. So that harmony is a combination of all of it. And so visually to us, it may look one way, but all vision is just an illusion.
Absolutely.
So that illusion is, we're just striving for harmony in our illusion.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
That's a good way to put it.
yes, Kathy.
But if you think of life as a stage play or a movie or a Shakespearean
Drama.
Tragedy.
Yes, absolutely.
whatever.
He wrote
Or
comedies
even,
as
or even
well.
a comedy, even a comedy. You
Yes.
never have anything like that, any work like that doesn't have conflict and drama
Yes.
and problems that have to be overcome. If you have a movie that starts, oh, we ended up happily ever after, and then you watch 2 hours of happily ever after, you're going to be asleep before the end of the movie.
And
It's
that's
gonna be
the
boring.
point. It's the contrast that more often than not is the teacher. Yes.
So if you look at different religions, in the Abrahamic religions, the goal is probably paradise or something.
Yes.
But in like the more dharmic religions, which are older, and I would include the Roman and Greek old religions in that too,
Right.
where you have many different faces of God and different roles and so on. Hinduism still surviving. The goal is not paradise, but the goal is freedom. The goal is moksha, which is salvation. Or no, not salvation, but freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom from this life and the cycle. So,
Right.
so maybe when we realize maybe once the drama goes away and our life is just a still sort of non-dramatic, thing, then after that we don't need to come back again and relive another drama.
Okay.
And that's really the goal of
Right.
these religions. So.
Yes. Jason.
So when we did the meditation earlier, you said to meditate on light and to think about the light and whatever.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And whenever we did, I could see light around everything.
Uh-huh.
I meditated with my eyes open, but there's like this light, and almost like everything we see is the shadow. Almost like the light projects the image of what we are, in the world, and the world is the shadow of the light.
Well,
So
in many
it's
ways, you're absolutely
So
right.
it's all
because
shadows.
That is the point. It's,
Take
yes,
that
Jeannie.
plant, for instance. See the shadow behind it?
Yes.
It would not be there without that light.
Right. Exactly.
So we have to have both.
Yeah, and if you think about what you just said, it is through that we get depth of perception.
Yes, yeah.
So it changes our perception.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point. It's this contrast that is so important in terms of the lessons that we learn, the things that we find out about. So okay. In her book When the Heart Waits, Sue Monk Kidd describes a conference she once attended, during which the participants were given a sheet of coloured construction paper and asked to tear it into a shape that represented their lives. While these were later being pasted on a bulletin board to form a large collage, someone came around with a glass bowl and collected the scraps of paper everyone had torn off and intended to discard. The jar was then placed on an altar Only by gathering up this confetti of scars and torn places, Kid says, only by embracing it and setting it on an altar can we begin to transform it. The philosopher G.I. Gurdjieff followed a similar instinct during the time he led a spiritual community in France, which included an old man whom no one liked. The man was irascible, unkempt, fighting with everyone and helping no one with the chores. One day, fed up with how he in turn was treated, he left for Paris to everyone's relief. Gurdjieff, however, followed him there and offered him a considerable monthly stipend if he would return to the community. When he did, everyone was appalled, and became more so when they discovered that the old man was now being paid for his incivilities, while the rest of them were paying quite a sum to be in the community. After hearing their complaints, Gurdjieff said, "This man is like yeast for bread. Without him here, you would never really learn about anger, irritability, patience and compassion. That's why you pay me and I hire him." Such solutions utilize what I've come to think of as bicycle psychology. If you're falling, you turn your wheel towards the fall, into the skid. If you're losing traction with the ground, you turn in the direction of the loss. We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung once said, but by making the darkness conscious. Though at the risk of some audacity, I would add that doing some of the former might come in handy during bouts with the latter. The body's own immune system operates on this principle and shows us that the skill of transforming darkness through embrace is one that comes quite naturally. It's one we know in ourselves. The body routinely turns not self into self, as the author Neil Douglas Klotz described, merging with invading enemies and making them part of the body, part of the whole. We can thus use whatever pulls us down to help pull us back up, the way rockets use the gravity of the planets to fling themselves deeper into space. We acquaint ourselves with the shadow and the past in which it leaves its tracks, however, in order to become aware of as much of our experience as we can, to have as much information as possible to draw on for our journeys. We're not just hauling whatever it is in the catacombs up into the light of day and cataloguing it, as if for some museum exhibit. We go bodily down there through therapy, art, journaling, active imagination, body work, etc., and spend some time just mucking around and getting to know the place. We are meant to stick our noses in this deep strata. It's common sense, Annie Dillard once wrote. When you move in, you try to learn the neighbourhood. The story of the Garden of Eden is a good case in point. Why would anyone have planted there a tree of knowledge of good and evil without expecting, without intending that the locals would take an interest? It's the original setup. It's like leaving a bunch of children alone in the house and telling them not to look in the cookie jar. Or telling Pandora not to look in the box you give her as a gift. We weren't provided with curiosities for nothing. The neighbourhood is out there for the exploring, and it stands to reason that we're going to stick our hands in the cookie jar, reach up into the tree, open the box, and we should. Danger lies not so much in the shadow itself, but in panic, in the acute anxiety that grips some people when confronted by some of the material there, in the fear of losing their footing in the conscious world because of what they find in the unconscious, in the fright that we feel, that we rightly feel, Bly says, when we see the shadow of an ape pass along the alley wall. If you're at all worried about being overwhelmed by your past or your shadow, reckon with it as a caretaking situation such as therapy or a therapeutic workshop. You can't just pull the contents out of the bag like you're pulling feathers out of a pillow, at least not without psychological readiness and considerable emotional effort as well as some grounding. A solid relationship or two, a work life, a community or a support group, some stabilizing routines, and a life with which you're not already overwhelmed. Above all, says Thomas More, take it easy. The shadow is a frightening reality, and anyone who talks blithely about integrating it as if you would chum up to the shadow the way you learn a foreign language doesn't know the darkness that always qualifies shadow. Why should we only honour those who die on the field of battle, the poet William Butler Yeats once asked, when we can show as much daring, as fierce a courage in entering into the abyss of ourselves.
Wow.
And that is a perfect place to actually finish.